definition of a venomous animal. He proposes it's something that has a gland that produces a toxin and then has some means of injecting that toxin into something else. And it's important to realize that whatever that gland is producing might not necessarily be for prey acquisition. It might have other roles to play in digestion or hormone regulation, like we think some of the lizards do. So we don't necessarily know what all of these chemicals are for that are being produced in the Devernois gland of the colubrids. And the reason it's sometimes called a Devernois gland, if you see that in the literature, as opposed to just a venom gland, is it is derived from a different set of glandular tissue than the venom gland in snakes. So he says that calling all of these things venomous may be misleading to the general public. Kind of food for thought. I don't know what the real best solution there is. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Technically, yes. But there are people who will tell you they're not.
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah, well,
it up and no one seems to.
No one freaks out? I'm going to talk about hognose in just a second. Scott Weinstein did a literature search and presented a talk where he found reports of 55 medically significant colubrid bites that had been reported in the literature. And that included a variety of things, but I just thought a couple of these were interesting. The first one is Boiga irregularis, which is the brown tree snake. If any of you are familiar with the brown tree snake and its decimation of the birds on Guam and the bats and other things, that's a picture of one up here on top. And there's actually some pretty severe symptoms that have been caused in children from bites of these snakes. Ptosis, that's the inability to open your eyes, so you look like you're drugged, but you can't open your eyes properly. It's a neurological symptom. And respiratory failure, that's kind of bad, I think we can all agree. And in adults, the symptoms reported have not been as severe, but edema, swelling, so really severe swelling. Phylodryas, which is this real pretty guy down here. And we had a discussion about this last time, but swelling, ecchymosis, which is bleeding under the skin, produces something that looks a lot like a bruise. Montpellier snake, cranial nerve palsy, so that's like palsies in the face and head. That's kind of bad. So those are serious symptoms. Those are not things where you just say, oh, it's no big deal. That's not necessarily life-threatening. Well, respiratory failure, I suppose, can be life-threatening, but most of these symptoms are not necessarily life-threatening, but there's something that maybe caused a person to seek medical attention, certainly interrupted their life for a little bit, and therefore are considered significant to the person who was bitten. Now, I told you I'd talk about hognose snake. Dan Kyler had a report of a hognose bite, a western hognose. A lady at a nature center was feeding the hognose snake, and I assumed she was using her hand. And when she went to put the mouse in, the snake got excited and bit her in the fleshy part of her thumb, I believe. Forearm. Oh no, bit her here. I don't know why I keep thinking that. Bit her in the forearm. And she allowed the snake to chew on her for a couple of minutes. Well, because she thought it's no big deal. She didn't want to hurt its teeth, you know. Well, she had basically what looked like a copperhead bite, for those of you who know what that looks like. She had swelling. Her entire arm was probably about twice the size that it should have been. She had blood blebs, which are basically blisters of blood that form under the skin. She had ecchymosis. She had bruising. It was awful looking. I've seen the pictures. Really amazing. I mean, if you had just shown Jim or I those pictures of that series of bite, or that series of pictures from the bite, we would have probably told you it was a copperhead bite. It looked really bad, and it was a hognose snake. Now, that's one report out of probably a heck of a lot of people who've been bitten by hognose snakes over the years. I think the take-home lesson is don't let it chew on you. But the other take-home lesson is it is a toxin. And even though it is mostly only dangerous to amphibians, which is what hognose snakes primarily eat, it's something that really doesn't belong in your system. So it's something to be considered. Go ahead. Didn't mean to go there.
I've actually been bit by western hognose. It's doing the same thing, feeding with my fingers. And it missed the pinky and grabbed my index finger. Probably chewed on my finger maybe 30 seconds before I was able to push it off of the thumb. I really didn't think of it about it at the time. About 3 hours after that, I had a burning sensation in my finger.
Interesting.
I didn't think about it till the next day.
Yeah, yeah,
I think one lesson that we can all learn from that is use tongs.
yeah. I think you're right. Yeah.
No, the reason they chew, they don't have fangs that inject, right?
They have enlarged groove teeth in the rear of the jaw, like most colubrids that are venomous do.
With gravity, it's not they inject.
It's capillary action. And gravity, I'm sure, helps too. Yeah, they do have to chew. I mean, they're not very efficient injectors of venom at all, certainly. I mean, even some of the more advanced colubrids, like a twig snake, really can inject pretty good. But we've worked with false water cobras. I'm not sure if all of you know what those are, but probably some of you do, which are a very large rear fang colubrid from South America. And they've got big mouths, and granted, their fangs are pretty small, but they can get their fangs pretty far forward just by lifting the rostral area of their face up, and their fangs come forward, which is what things like the twig snake are even better at doing. So I think sometimes we sell these guys short just because there aren't very many bad cases. Yes, June?
I remember we were talking about something we were going to put in the
Oh,
program.
yes.
It was the boom sling and the twig snake. They're the two
yes,
that
I
have
was going
caused
to add,
death.
yeah. The boom slang and the twig snake, which probably you guys, at least you guys know this, are the two colubrids that are kind of historically known for causing death. And that's primarily because they killed famous herpetologists. You should
That's
all...
how we know they're...
Yeah, that's how we know, because they're like, oh, this is nothing, no big deal, I'm going to write about it and see what happens, and then the paper just ends. So, if you're interested in working with snakes, you really should be required to read those papers. They're kind of spooky.
And the boom sling's bite, if you're not familiar with the lividity, it causes you to bleed out, where if you're sitting down, you'll have blood in your buttocks.
Wherever your low points are, you'll
Yeah.
have pooling blood, because
Yeah.
it just consumes your clotting factor. So, things to consider. I'm not very good at this thing. There we go. Okay. I just thought this was cool, so I was going to talk about it. Steve McKessie did this talk on basically why is the snake's venom not digesting the snake's head? Which I thought was kind of a good question that I had never thought about. And so how do they